Well, welcome to another RDWorks Learning Lab. Today we're going to concentrate again on our modifications for the little China blue machine. Now, the last time we looked at this, we made a serious modification to the head. We've replaced this clunky head with a much smaller and more compact and lightweight acrylic head. I have to say it works extremely well, and I've had lots of requests for the design. Once you see something in 3D and start using it, you can be critical. And the fact that I've got all these lenses as a set. Now at the moment these are manufactured in plastic, but ultimately they'd have to be manufactured in aluminium, and that means you have to buy a complete set of lens tubes. And I thought about that and realised that maybe that's not the best solution. So my Mark II design is based around this lens tube assembly, which you can buy from all sorts of places in China. It's going to have to be modified slightly, but it's a very simple modification. And I'm going to make that into a little module that fits into my acrylic head. Now that requires some modifications to the head itself. So we're going to evolve a Mark II design. And that's what we're going to cut today. So basically I'm going to use the Mark I design to dig its own grave. Now because this is a new design, every time I go to it at the moment I'm just being rather cautious, and I'm just doing checks just to make sure that nothing has moved and that everything is still nicely in line. So I'll stick my little target holder in there, and we'll just do a quick pulse check to make sure everything is nice and central still. And there we go. Can't ask for better than that. That means the beam is going right down the centre of that lens tube, so it's very easy to check. Now for this task we're going to require some 2mm acrylic sheet. Now this particular sheet, I've designed the parts to go onto, it's basically 17 inches long, about 435mm. Yeah, it's 205mm that way, or about 8 inches. One other advantage of this particular compact head design is because it hasn't got this serious length attached to it, the table is actually nice and high. Now the great advantage of having the table nice and high is that the airflow across the table comes in through the front here and goes straight across the table and out the back. So it helps the airflow across the job as well. But bear in mind, this is a fixed nozzle system, which means you cannot use it if you don't have an adjustable table. There's no other way to focus this head. Right, so first off I've just put my job up on little spacers, so I'm about 12mm off the deck, so I've got lots of airflow underneath the job. Well, that's all the plastic stripped off. Now we've got a big pile of pieces here. I think we can narrow them down quite quickly by picking up pieces that look the same. For instance, we've got two very big rectangular pieces here. We're going to stick them together like this. It's 2mm thick at the moment, this material, but we're going to turn it into a piece of 4mm thick material, because there's no point in you buying 4mm material and 2mm material. So I'm going to be making pieces up by multiplying the thicknesses. This is a product called WC123, and it's a PETG cement, which is a slightly gentler form of adhesive than acrylic cement. It works just as well, but it's less likely to cause crazing and cracking on the stressed edges. Now this is by a UK company called Bondrite, and I don't know whether or not they ship this stuff elsewhere around the world, but at least I've given you the information. It is just like water, and it comes in this dispenser with a needle on it. And so I'm going to show you, like I do every time I do this assembly, how to use it. Some people don't see my previous work, they just jump into things that interest them. So I've got a nice flat surface here to work on. Now make sure you don't work on your wife's worktop, because this stuff is pretty aggressive and it will damage plastics. What we're going to do is we're going to use the worktop as a levelling surface, and we're going to put these pieces together like this so that they're nice and level. Hold them upright. Hopefully you'll see that when I put this stuff in, the capillary action causes this stuff to run all down the inside of the joint. I'll put it on the edge at the joint there. I'll just wipe it off the edge and the surface, but it's already gone down the inside, and I'm going to hold it for something like 30 seconds. Clamp it together. Now whatever you do, don't get it on your fingers, because if you get it on your fingers and you clamp this together, you'll find your fingers, just like super glue, will get stuck to this job. And then after 30 seconds or so, we can turn it round and we can do the other corner where the capillary action again should cause the glue to go into the material. Now with this large piece of material, what I will finally do is just put a bead of glue along the edge. Just let it settle there for a minute and it will dry, and it will bond the edges together. Even if we haven't got a complete film down the centre here, what we'll effectively be doing is melting and bonding the edges together. And you can sit there and you can just watch it evaporating and drying. Now, probably takes maybe best part of half an hour or so to go off really solid. Now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to find these little pieces with a lump on the end. Now there should be 4 of them. 2 of them are plain and 2 of them have got holes in, so they're going to go together as pairs like that. Plain one underneath and the hole on the top. And again, we're going to bond these together. With this particular assembly, we need to make sure the edges where I'm holding them are nicely aligned. And now again, what I can do is I can put my glue into the top corner here, and you'll see it running all the way down the inside edge. Just wipe the surface very quickly. Once you've wiped the surface, you can actually hold it because it won't stick to your fingers, and leave that to dry. We do the same thing with this. Make sure the edges line up. Okay, so that's that one done as well. Now the next set, which will take a big chunk away, are these little squares. These little squares have got a notch along one edge. So find the 4 pieces that have got little notches along the edge. Now these pieces here look to have the same size holes in them. Not quite true. This one here, which has got the hexagonal holes in the corner, is slightly smaller. Now this is going to be a sandwich that's going to make up our mirror holder. And obviously with a mirror holder we need somewhere to put the mirror into the back and somewhere to stop the mirror falling out of the front. So that's why this one is smaller. So this one goes down first, and we must make sure that we put the little hole, the little reference hole here, right in the bottom left hand corner. Okay, now of the ones that we've got left, we've got this one here which has got slots along the top. Let's put that one aside for a moment, and the 2 that are left are exactly the same. So what we need to do is to put this, line up the notches and the small hole in the bottom left hand corner and pop it on top. The 3rd one in the sandwich is the one with the slots in it, and then there's only one left to go on top. So now we've got a 4-plate sandwich, and of course with 4 plates it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get everything to glue together. It'll also run onto your fingers as well at the side here, so be careful. Now I'll lift it up carefully and clamp the bottom corner. And now I can run some glue along this top edge. Now clamp the top edge, but don't take the glue off. Let it dry along the top edge there. Just make sure things are lined up, because you can still just about line things up at this moment within about 10 or 15 seconds of applying the glue. And then you're in trouble, you'll have to recut them. Now you can look through it and make sure that everything is lined up, otherwise you'll be in trouble. Now we're going to run a puddle of glue along all the edges. You can see I've put a big blob of glue along there. Just let it seep in and dry, and that will help to bond the whole assembly together. Now we certainly don't want this one to delaminate, so we're going to have to leave this one for probably at least an hour to make sure the glue is really set and this becomes one solid lump of acrylic, because we're going to drill holes and we're going to tap holes in here. Okay, well next we're going to find these pieces here. There are 3 very narrow strips, and then we've got this piece here with 2 slots in it, and this piece here with 2 slots in it as well. I'm trying to make a bracket that holds the head. Instead of my aluminium adjustable bracket that I've got on there, I'm going to be using this back plate that we glued together first, along with these pieces here, to try and simulate and make a bracket that will hold the head firmly in place. Now I can hear you say, the guy's an idiot trying to make a bracket out of pieces of flimsy acrylic. Don't be too abusive at this moment in time, because think of concrete. It's one of the most terrible materials around. It's weak, it's flimsy, but if it's used correctly and you exploit its one major strength, which is its ability to take compressive load, it's a fantastic material. In other words, we need to understand the material properties and exploit them. We'll steer clear of the weaknesses and just take the strengths. And hopefully that's what I've been able to do here with these few little pieces. Now you need to follow me very carefully with this one, because we can't afford to get this one assembled wrongly. The first thing we must do is we must put these 2 slots down on the table like this, so that we've got the slots at say 7 o'clock and 1 o'clock. Okay, now with these 2 thin pieces you can't actually put them on the wrong way, because the holes won't line up. There's only one way for them to go on, and that's like this. This is going to be a little bit of a tricky assembly, so what I would suggest you do is this. We're going to pop it onto a little piece of, tissue, and we're going to put just a small blob of glue right at the end here in these corners. Now we don't want to flood it, we just want a little teeny weeny blob of glue there and there. Now you can see that it's gone through to the paper underneath. Move it so that it doesn't stick to the paper. Okay, and now before the glue has a chance to set on the end there, pop this onto the other tabs at the other end. Okay, now that will just hold it roughly the right orientation, keep these pieces more or less upright. That means that this piece now is not going to fall apart, hopefully, when we do the next operation. Now what I'm going to suggest you do is what I'm doing here, and that is just literally to put a blob of glue on these 2 little tabs. 1, 2. Now we'll hold that for about 10 or 15 seconds, just let the glue bite just a little bit, because we don't want this thing to set hard. We've got to now square this whole thing up by putting this plate on the end, but we don't want everything to fall apart, which is why I've sort of tack glued it together. So now we should be able to put these together like this. Okay, and that whole assembly should now go together and make this little bracket up. So there's 2 tabs on the top here which stick through, so they're location tabs, so don't worry about those. What we're more interested in is making sure we get the whole of this assembly flat here. Okay, now once we've got this assembly flat, what we're going to do is we're going to drop little bits of glue into the tabs themselves. wipe your excess glue off this surface here, because we need to hold this down. So we need to hold this top plate, clamp everything up. Now, as I said, after 30 seconds it's not going to fall apart. Right. But now, bear in mind, we've only tacked this thing together. What we're going to have to do now is to run along every single joint with a bead of glue. And although we've run along these joints here with a bead of glue, we mustn't forget that actually one of the weakest points is this intersection here, this little angle section inside the bracket. Doesn't matter if you get a little pool of glue there, that's a very high stress area. And then we need to do the same on the other end here. There's our little bracket that we hope is going to be strong enough to mount our head on, so you don't have to do any aluminium machining for yourself. Now you can see when I drop this onto here how those two location tabs here drop into the slots, and they give us nice parallel motion for our adjustment. Okay, well, we haven't got that many pieces left to glue now. Now these are an obvious pair because they've got pairs of holes and they've got a big hole in the middle. This one has got tabs on it, this one hasn't. Right, so first we're going to find this piece which has got its tabs on the side, and we're going to orientate it so that the tab is along the bottom edge and the holes are at, if you like, 11 o'clock and 5 o'clock, not at 1 o'clock and 7 o'clock. So 5 o'clock and 10 o'clock is the correct orientation. So making sure that you line up the cutout at the bottom, then there's only one way for this to line up with this plate. Normal procedure, locate it flat on your work surface and pull the edges into line. Clamp it, lock it up in just one corner, and then on this opposite corner here we're going to put our glue. Right, now after about 10 seconds, as I said, you can gently let it go and make sure that all the edges are lined up. After 10 seconds you'll be struggling. So if everything's nicely lined up, just apply a little bit of pressure for about another 15 or 20 seconds. And then you can place that aside and let it dry. And now we're going to pre-assemble these two pieces. We can make sure we get the edges lined up and the bottoms lined up, and then we can clamp it and we can put our glue along the back edge there, and it will run nicely down inside. Then we should be able to put a little bit along the front edge here as well. Now I want you to now find these two pieces. We need to put the squares down first and then put the U shape on top, and what we're going to try and do is to glue these two together. Now the problem is we've got to make sure that various other bits and pieces fit in here as well. So what I'd like you to do is to first of all find this piece with the tongue on it, and then there are two holes, diagonal holes in it. Can you make sure the holes sit at 10 o'clock and 5 o'clock? Not that way round, but this way round, that hole on the top. Okay, just place it on top there for a moment, and then pick these two pieces up like this. And what we're going to do, we're going to assemble that on top of there, like that. And this one on top of here, like this. So that we've made like a little bridge thing up. Okay, we're now going to pick the whole of that assembly up and drop it into the base, and that will help to line all the slots up in the base. Now what I'm going to ask you to do now is to turn it on its back like that, and what we're going to try and do, we're going to put a little bit of glue along this front edge here so that we can tack the base together with all the holes in line. We don't want to glue it yet because I don't want the risk of gluing anything together, because we've got to take this whole assembly apart. So just along the center section here we'll put a bead of glue like that so that it runs into the joint, So after about 30 seconds or so, we can stand that back up, push it down onto the deck and lift these pieces out. Okay, now we're sure that this is nicely lined up. There is one more bit that we really ought to pre-assemble, and that's the piece that we've just taken apart. We'll put that back on there like this, but we must make sure that we don't do what I've just done here, which is to put these holes the wrong way round. Remember what I said? That hole has to go at 10 o'clock. So now we've assembled that, we need to put this piece on and exactly the same way round, because that's got those same two holes, so make sure the holes match up. Right, we've got this tongue sticking out the bottom here. We can press this assembly together, as I'm doing here with my fingers, and we can put some glue on that tongue and you'll see it run into the job just a little bit. So we can hold that and clamp that together. Then after a few minutes we can stand the whole thing on end, and again, still holding it together, we can put a blob of glue along the top edge here. Now we need this pre-assembled because we've got to tap holes in here and we've got to allow the glue to dry. Before we can finally assemble everything, we've got to put some tapped holes in here. Now normally I use my tapping attachment, as you've probably seen before. If I was tapping an M4 hole in metal, I would probably be using 3.1, maybe 3.2. I'm doing this in a much softer material and I don't want to break the material, so I'm going to use a 3.4 drill. Now the pilot hole will pick up the drill nicely for you. Don't force the drill, just keep allowing it to clear. You don't want the drill to get hot because it will melt the plastic. Right, now in the past you've seen me using my my tapping attachment. Today I'm going to try and do without it, so that you guys that don't have such luxuries can do it by hand. Okay, now what I've got here is a tap. It's an M4 tap, but it's a bit special in that it's a machine tap. Now most of the taps that you guys can buy from a hardware store will probably be hand taps, and you get a set of 3 of them. You don't need 3 with this sort of tap. It's got a special point on the end, and you'll be able to buy these off of eBay or somewhere if you really want to. These are machine taps, and they're called spiral point taps, and they will enable you to tap through a hole in one go. So what we're going to do, we're going to try and line the thread up carefully and push gently to get the thread started. Now what I'm going to do now that it's started, we need to keep an eye on the fact that the thread is running in true to our material and square to our material, in other words true to the hole. And what we do every half a turn, we'll have a check just to make sure that we are keeping it in line. Now after 4 or 5 turns you'll find that the actual tap will pull itself into the hole, but if it starts off too far it won't. Now I've gone about halfway in, and now I'm going to take the tap out and clear any debris away, because tapping acrylic is not, you're likely to build up pressure inside the thread and split the layers that we've got here. So we've got to be quite careful because we don't want to burst these layers. Right, I'm now about half or 3/4 of the way in, and I'm going to come out again and clear the thread. Now make sure when you start the tap off again you very gently find the previous thread. Don't try and cut another thread. On the 3rd occasion we should find ourselves bursting through to the centre. We make sure we put the tap well through till all the load goes off the tap and it feels as though it's actually free. Okay, you can see how much tap I've put through there, excess. Now, that's one plate that has to be tapped, M4. There's two other plates that require tapping, M4. One of them is this plate here, which is a double thickness plate. So we can try and do the same thing with that. Try and keep the thread true to the surface in two planes. Keep looking at it as you're starting the thread off. Now, if you remember, we put the slot at the bottom and we put the holes at 10 o'clock and 5 o'clock. Now what we need to do is make sure that we make the outer pair of holes furthest away, so it's that one there and that one there are going to be tapped M4. The inner two holes are for the springs. Now when I release the drawings for these, it will say which holes have got to be tapped and what size they've got to be tapped. Now we've got just one more to do, and that's this plate here for fixing it onto its bracket. Thinking about that, rather than get you guys to put an M3 tap through there, what I will do, I will drill that hole out 3mm and we'll put a 3mm screw in there with a nut on the back. This makes life easy just to drop an M3 screw through there and put a little nut on the back. We really only need that screw as a sort of a spacer and pivot point. So it's not doing anything, all it's doing is sitting there doing just this. Just a pivot point. Now we don't need that just yet, so we'll put that to one side. But we do need some of the other pieces that we've been pre-assembling. Right, now we're going to assemble the body from the remaining pieces that we've got on here. Now this is a little bit of a tricky assembly. This is where you ideally want as many arms as an octopus. Making sure that this hole is the top left and the other tapped hole is bottom right. Okay, and we're going to plug that onto the back of this piece here. And then we'll put the other side on, like that. And this is where it gets tricky because you need to hold it upright like this without dropping the sides off. Okay, so you've got to clamp the sides as well as hold the back. So the sides actually finish up going inwards like that so they don't fall out. Now this piece here with the notch on the bottom and the plain corner at the bottom left, we're going to slip that into these top slots here. Okay, now once we've got these in this top slots here, this is where it gets a bit tricky. All right, now once you've got those in there, you can start clamping up the top here, and all of a sudden it becomes a much more stable assembly. Now we've got one more tricky bit to do. We're going to pick up this piece with its long tongues on, and with the tongues on the bottom part, i.e. the square in the square is on the top. We're going to put that in between here, and we've got to get those tongues, there we go, look, we've got to get those tongues in the slots at the back so that it just wobbles around inside there. When you turn the base over, the little squares are going to be underneath and the little U-shapes going to be on top. And then we can plug this whole thing into the base like that. And now all of a sudden it becomes a stable unit, and this piece moves up and down like that. I always like to use kitchen roll because it helps to absorb any run through that you get. So I'm going to start off by running a bead of glue along this bottom edge, and as I run along that bottom edge you'll see that the glue runs through the tongues. Now just move it around a little bit and all of a sudden it'll be clean. Put some pressure down here on the base now. We need to make sure that the back is pressed firmly home. It's a little bit difficult to hold that one. You can see I'm holding it across the notches and putting my finger in the middle there at the back, because what I want to do is I now want to run a bead of glue down that back corner there. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over and do exactly the opposite. Run it down this corner here. Not content with that, I'm going to run a bead of glue all around the inside of this base plate as well. I've now turned it upside down and I'm going to run a bead of glue down these two internal edges here. Well, I don't think there's many more places I can apply glue. The most important thing is that this bit here moves up and down freely. Okay, now it's going to wobble around a little bit at the moment, but that's purely because of the way in which clearances have to exist. You'll see that in a few seconds that will change. So what I've got here now are a couple of tension springs. I think I've got to hold it near the bottom, to be honest. Hook the top on, stretch the bottom down and hook that on. There we go, we've done it. So let's just try that for the second spring. Hold the spring near the bottom, hook the top on, and then stretch it down and hook the bottom on. And there we go. And now all of a sudden, all the slack and the floppiness has disappeared. Okay, well, here's our little fixing bracket that's got to be fixed to the unit, and that should sit on the back there, and it should slide nicely backwards and forwards in the tongues that are sticking out of the back plate there. And similarly, this piece is going to fix to the machine, and that will then allow me to adjust it up and down. Now, the great thing about this design is if it doesn't work, I can just cut some more. The fortunate thing is I've got a backup machine that I can play with. If you're modifying this design to fit a different machine, I'd make sure that your dimensions are well tested and checked before you take your original head off. Now that really does seem like a very, very strong bracket. So, but we won't know until we put it on the machine. Now we've built the body, it's time to put a few little finishing touches to this. First of all, we need to make our mirror holder. Just like in the previous version, the mirror holder requires a couple of M3 nuts to be put in the back here. And if you get the nuts flat, they should push in and stay in like that. We also need to put M3 by 10mm long grub screws into these mirror clamping holes. So we put the screws through until we can just about see them coming through the hole. Now for the moment I'm putting an old copper mirror blank in here. Now if you push the screws out too far, the mirror won't go in. So the mirror should just drop in like that, and then you can lightly just tighten up your screws onto the mirror until you get some resistance, and that will lock the mirror in place with 3-point location. So these two screws are at 120 degrees, jamming it down at the bottom there on a third position. So it's a very secure mounting system. We could do that after this whole assembly is in, but I've decided to do it before. Now we've got some M3 by 20mm long screws and a special spring. Now I'll give all these details on the drawings. So now we're going to use some more of our grub screws and we're going to put our grub screws in here as adjusting screws for the mirror. And we can see the gap here caused by this screw head. what we need to do is set the mirror up so that it's basically parallel in that plane. And then when we put this other screw in, we can look at it from the front and set that up so that it's parallel. There we go. So now we've got our mirror set up with about a 1.5mm gap all the way round. And that's a good starting point for the mirror setting. And actually I can feel that the copper mirror weighs almost as much as the rest of the head. Now comes the magical part of the head. This is the bit that you can make if you've got a suitable workshop, and I'm quite happy to give you the drawings to buy and make the pieces yourself. But there are of course many people that can't and don't have workshop skills or workshop facilities, in which case I plan to make a small batch of these nozzles, CNC turn them, or get somebody else to make them. So there will be a cost involved to making these nozzles. Also buying and supplying the lens tube. Now that's not the lens tube that you normally see. It's normally a lot longer and it isn't machined on this end here. So I've had to make 2 modifications to this, and what it allows me to do is to use a 2.5-inch lens, a 1.5-inch lens, a 2-inch lens, and even I've made allowance in this nozzle so that we can put the compound lens assembly in the nozzle as well. So we've got 4 lens combinations from 2.5 down to the compound lens system that we can use here. Now you only need one of these, but you'll have to keep changing the lenses. Okay, that's maybe not a hardship. I mean, I personally have ordered several of these, and I shall have one of these set up for every lens configuration. But that's my choice. But for the moment, there are no lenses in here, and I'll just show you how it works. A piece of 4mm polyurethane tube. Now this tube is a very convenient size. It plugs directly into the 6mm tube that usually feeds your head. There's also a hole in the side of the nozzle that allows me to get the air assist into the bore of the nozzle underneath the lens, which is why the O-ring is there. Not that there's going to be a big problem with air leakage, but it's also a little compressible membrane in the system. So this normally just pushes in. It's a snug fit, and it's purposely designed as a snug fit so that it doesn't come out. All right, so you don't need any complicated air fitting to go in there. Before we put the pipe in, we have to plug the nozzle into the bottom of the head there. Now, once it's through, the air hole is a pretty snug fit with the bottom surface of this. So you'll have to work just a little bit to get the air tube in there. Purposely designed like that so that it holds the nozzle in and doesn't allow it to flop around. So you'll need to plug the air tube in with something like a pair of pliers. You can just apply pressure and push it in. It's locked, this nozzle, into place. You've chosen the lens type that you want. It could be 2-inch, 2.5 or 1.5, and it will be in that assembly. All we now do is to lift up the spring-loaded flap. There's an accurate location on the top of the nozzle and on the end of the lens tube, which ensures that they line up nicely. And then we're going to let this little flap go. Now the little flap will not immediately go down flat because things don't quite line up when you first plug them in. So what you'll have to do is just gently pull the lens towards you probably, and all of a sudden you'll feel that this little spring-loaded flap drops down. Now once the spring-loaded flap drops down, it guarantees that the lens is perfectly upright and in line, because this little plate cannot move. It's locked in with these little tabs on the side to give me control this way, and it's also locked in with the cheeks sideways. So we've got a perfect registration every time we put the lens in. So the great advantage of this system is that the lens is very close to the mirror. We haven't got the lens stuck down here 6 or 8 inches or 10 inches away from the mirror, where any small variation can cause you problems with your cut. So there's the basic principle sorted out now. We're assembled, and we're ready to load that onto a machine. Again, I will just reinforce this design is really only for the China Blue machine. It's designed with the bracket mounting on the back,